Now that is a trailer for a book, Alex. I
Yeah.
mean, seriously, Waterstones were like, what the hell? What is this?
Who cares?
Who cares? It's amazing. Well, listen, welcome everyone. I'm here with Alex Barker from Be More Pirate and How to Be Even More Pirate. It's what we're talking about tonight. Alex, great to have you with us. How are you doing? Where are you joining us from?
Thanks, Ben. I'm joining you from actually quite sunny South London.
Yeah, spring is here, right?
Yeah.
It's happening. And we have already got, I can see Anthony, Ali, Joe, Kathy have all said hello. Good to see you here. I can see the numbers growing all the time. Welcome to Rebel Book Club. For some of you, this may be your first session with us. You've joined at the right time. You've joined a good one tonight. And just to explain briefly, really briefly, Orlando, Florida's in the house. Amy, thank you for being with us. Always like it when the Americans turn up at breakfast to join an evening Rebel social. Tej is here. Fantastic. Nice to see you, Tej. Yo. We're going to have a chat with Tej in a little bit. One of our pirates. And Dina as well. So, Alex, that's the pirate book falling off the shelf. There you go. That's the problem when you don't have like a chunky hardback. Obama's solid. He ain't going anywhere, is he? But, you know. The difference is, I've read your book. I haven't read Obama's. Obama's is a great, wedge. But this is more useful to me in my life right now. So, Alex, what I thought we'd do to connect with our crew who are here tonight in the house. We call them crew, right?
Yeah.
That's it. On board the ship, hop-in ship tonight.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to do a quick fire Q&A to get to know you a little bit, and then Alex is going to share how to be more pirate in 10 minutes, a version of, so you can all get to know it. For those that you don't, this is brand new to you or haven't yet read the book, it'll be a great little taster. And then we'll get into some questions, introduce a couple of pirates, and then we've got a bonus guest at the end of the night, end of the session, which is exciting. In terms of how it works, really simple. You can see the chat. Lots of you are joining. Vincent, can't wait to hear from Tej. No pressure. You got your fans here, Tej. That's good to see. So you can see the chat running here. We're on what's called the stage. If you've got questions, you can go across this thing called Slido. You can drop questions in here. But if you want to put in official questions for Alex or anyone else tonight, you can go across to this thing called Slido, and there's a Q&A there, so you can drop a question in there. And there's also a poll which says one word that encapsulates the pirate mindset. So you may have that already. A few people have chucked in words. Questioning is the big word in that word cloud so far. So keep dropping words in there, and you might have more thoughts once you've heard from Alex. So that's going on there. The chat is here. That's about it, and we're ready to go. So Alex, by the way, shall I read your four-page biography before we start? No. Doesn't exist. 4-page biography doesn't exist.
I don't write a 4-page biography.
I'm going to give it a tweet-sized biography. So from a lit student to a decade in the charity sector, Alex has escaped her own career path to become a more active citizen and a professional rule breaker, teaming up with author of Be More Pirate, Sam Conniff, who we know well at RBC, to start helping all kinds of people and organizations make things better by ripping things up, and is co-author of this wonderful new book, the follow-up, How to Be More Pirate. So Alex, quick fire questions. Ready?
Yeah.
Tea or coffee?
Coffee.
Rum or whiskey?
Rum.
Yeah, on brand. Have to be. Patch or hook?
Okay, so hooks are real. Patches were made up when it comes to pirates, but I don't want to lose a hand, so I'm going to say patch.
Why were what? Hang on. Why were patches made up? When did that happen?
I think that's just not a real. I think that was just a fictional. Because there's so much about pirates that is fact, not fact. And that
walking the plank.
Walking the plank is fiction.
Yeah.
But because of the fact that, as we're going to, as probably some of you know, pirates actually looked after their crew. Things like hooks and wooden legs were real because they, helped people if they got injured.
And then you got a good payroll. You got good pay for it if that happened. So, okay, continuing. Here we go. Shipwreck or health tech?
I don't know. Shipwreck?
Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't have to be reason here. Marmite or peanut butter?
Usually peanut butter, Marmite if I'm hungover.
There you go. There's some moral dilemmas. Beyonce or Jay-Z?
Beyonce.
Prince William or Prince Harry?
Oh, Prince Harry, come on.
Oh, easy. Still seas or wild oceans?
Still seas.
Drum and bass or grime?
Grime.
21st century pirate. Mad Max or Waterworld?
Mad Max.
Ah, a pirate who likes the desert. Optimist or realist?
Optimist. They're not opposites.
They're not opposites. You're absolutely right. I've been corrected. They're not opposites. And then a couple other questions. It's a year today since lockdown started here in the UK, or COVID became a huge deal. So what's been the hardest thing for you in the last year that you're happy to share?
I think just, well, it's loneliness, I suppose, yeah, definitely been periods of time. Well, I live on my own, so I probably never had this level of aloneness. But I think it's more the just lack of variation and stimulation, kind of monotony that, because I don't mind being on my own, but you're used to a certain level of variation within it, and that hasn't happened. So I suppose, yeah, I'm happy to share. There have definitely been some low moments, but I'm sure that's the case for everyone. And
the flip of that challenge, what's the best thing that's happened in the last year?
Well, aside from publishing my book, which I was super happy to do it within the pandemic conditions, I think I finally just managed to rearrange in my mind what work is, and I don't anymore think of work that I have to work all the time. And I think even, in the first year of Be More Pirate, as much as I'm like, was a fledgling pirate and willing to kind of break some rules and rewrite them and all of that, I was still conditioned by, a decade of kind of working in an organization and feeling the pressure of my boss over my shoulder. And Sam was never that kind of boss or anything, but it's internal. And so this year I've broken it, and that's been the best thing.
And that habit's there for life now.
I don't think I could ever go. I'm really hoping this works out, because I don't think I could go back now.
It's working. It's totally working out. It's the time. It's never been needed more. The work you're doing. It's interesting about that sort of structure. We're reading this book at RBC this month called Rest, which is about deliberate. Essentially, the message of the book is, if you're more deliberate with how you rest, you'll be a much more effective in your creativity, your work, and whatever your purpose, professional mission is. And of course, the author rattles through all these examples from history of people who work 4 hours a day and are amazing. And it's very patriarchal, because they had their lives set up in some ways. But Darwin's a good example, right? He worked for 4 hours every day and churned out all these books and theories that changed the world. But it's the permission that all these people seem to give themselves to do it.
Yeah.
And they were rule breakers, obviously, in their own rights. And they had a society that was set up for them, as many men have. But it's so interesting once people get to that point in their careers where, often it comes later in a career, because it's a sort of fuck it, middle-aged, I don't care what the rules anymore. But it's great that people are doing that, seem to be doing it earlier and earlier in their careers. Is that something you're seeing with the communities and the people you're working with?
I think people find it very hard. I think it's a bit of both. It's either systemic barriers or it's internal barriers that are kind of getting in your way. Is one thing, you give yourself permission, and there's the other thing where you feel as though you can't. You're going to have somebody telling. I guess it comes down to being told off. It's that legacy of even of school that people will feel. But yeah, I've definitely seen people give it much more consideration than they ever have done before. But I do think it's quite a hard mindset to get out of. I did a session just before Christmas with the whole team. We were an incredible, innovative, quite pirate marketing agency, and there's only 6 of them, so they had all the permission that they wanted. They all agreed on this stuff around they wanted to have a whole day off per week for the team to kind of have that brain space. But there was deep internal resistance. So, but this is the moment. If ever there was one, this is it.
Exactly. So talking of moments, I know that lots of people will be aware of the Be More in this community, will be aware of the Be More Pirate thing, aren't quite sure what it's all about, curious, feel aligned to it already without understanding it. You're kindly going to spend 10 minutes now walking us through the story and how you're helping people. And we're like properly anti slides and presentations Rebel Book Club, but this is an exception, and I've asked Alex to do this. She hasn't enforced it and said I must show my slides, so only because these slides are wicked, and I think it really helps drill the story and the message in. So thank you for doing this, Alex. I'll let you bring them up and tell your story.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I hope people are cool with slides, because that's what I'm doing. Right, this should.
Oh yeah, Lavinia's saying it doesn't have to be crazy at work. That is a great book as well on this side. This idea of no goals and rule breaking. Yeah, looks good, Alex.
That's cool. Okay, yeah, and I think that just on that point, the story with this is Be More Pirate Part 2, really, and the start of it is part to answer that question. Like, it's really great that people can write books about ideas that change the world, but it really only matters to me if people can actually put them into practice. And that was the thing that where I was when I came to Be More Pirate. I'd worked in a place where I'd seen, maybe 2 or 3 authors present their books per week on a stage. And I was like, yeah, but we don't have the time or the capacity to put this into practice. So it felt like this big gap for me. But so when I picked up Be More Pirate the first time, I actually put it back down, because I felt that it was a little bit, selling me a promise that maybe couldn't deliver. I thought How to Take on the World and Win was a bit clickbaity, and I realized it was going to be about social change, and I was a bit fed up of that whole kind of experts saying this, and this, and then not really putting their money where their mouth is. So I came to it with some skepticism. A couple of months later, I came across a really interesting job advert for a right-hand pirate. A friend sent it to me, and I thought, I read it through and realized that it was the same book, this book that I didn't really like very much. So but the job sounded so interesting that I had to go back and read the book the whole way through. And I did still have some questions, but I had never seen sort of change presented quite like this before. So I went and interviewed with Sam for the job. And I did take him to task on it. I said, what are you trying to do here? Is this book more style over substance? And there's a few things in it I'd like to challenge. And he said, you tell me. That is the brief. All I know is I've got messages from people all over the world explaining the rebellions that they want to start and breaking rules, quitting their jobs. And I don't know what's happening, but it feels like something is starting and I want some help. And that just sounded like such an interesting brief to me. So I set about finding out what all these people were doing and just kind of sitting down and interviewing and talking to them and trying to understand the practicalities of it, because I am quite practical. And I was, as I said, I was so fed up that I thought I want to understand exactly how you break rules and what does rebellion look like in the 21st century. And I never really imagined, to be honest with you, that it would turn into this new book, that it would become a whole kind of like chunk of stories, but there was so much substance in it that it couldn't not be. And here's some of the crew, just to show everyone kind of took to social media and was talking about what they were doing, and it was just fascinating. But the line that kind of stood out the most, I think, just to frame it, what Be More Pirate is really about, is this idea that no one is coming to save the day. We're at this point of complexity in the 21st century where the systems and the business models aren't working anymore. And this was the line in Be More Pirate that was most repeated back from the community, saying this was the thing where it shook me. And I found that it was both terrifying but also liberating, because once you can no longer rely on the experts and the structures and the systems we have, you really will have to trust yourself. And that is an interesting and empowering journey to go on. And of course,
just to jump in this point, Alex, when you're hearing all this feedback, is this across every industry? Is it every sector? We're talking, education, health, politics, where is this? Because obviously there's, looking at this last year in particular in the pandemic, the scientists have come to the fore and have in some ways saved us, and so, which has been a really positive story, because it's this really does matter because we have bigger challenges coming. Was the response to this, no one's coming to save us, from all over the place, or was it in one area?
Yeah, it was all over the place. It was a wholesale response from big business, corporates. I mean, you can see the scope in the book there is kind of corporates to entrepreneurs to education, massive massively from healthcare. Like that's been the biggest sector that has gone, we need to be pirate. And it's not because there aren't experts that can save the day, but you know, to get into the conversation about healthcare, like it's about communication, it's about trust, it's about agency and autonomy. It's a whole system. It's not just scientists can create a vaccine and then we're all going to, you know, use it. You know, as we've seen, it's about distribution. It's about people believing in it and the messages that are delivered. So that system has to work. And the kind of norms and processes that we have in place at the moment don't a lot of the time. And that's what I was seeing from the pirates. And that's what they were starting to explain. And one of the points was this idea that, you know, the closer you are to the problems, the more likely you are to have like a viable solution. And then when you've got decision makers right at the top deciding, you know, because they are seen as the people with the status and the authority, it doesn't work anymore because they haven't got the full view anymore. And so that was what they were saying, is that we people closest to the information need more power. And yet we are stuck in very hierarchical kind of places. Does that help frame it?
Definitely.
Okay, cool. So yes, so this is it. And I was going to go on and say, you know, this has been the year of it. Like everybody has seen the kind of uncertainty like up close. So I think a lot more people have come to the fore and kind of gone, okay, I get it. The system is fragile. And, you know, we've seen these huge uprisings because the inequality that was always there has also been highlighted. And there's a sort of sense that it was always rigged for some people. But more people are able to see it more clearly now. But then you have this space opening up where you've got all this possibility, this opportunity to really redesign the future, and that's where the pirates sort of step in. But for those of you who've maybe not read Be More Pirate or heard of it before, you know, what Sam does in the book is kind of debunk the myth of the Captain Hook style pirate, this cartoonish villain that has been orchestrated by Walt Disney over the years, and sort of says like this isn't really what piracy was about. They weren't out these kind of liars who were out for themselves. They were actually more like kind of this kind of a group of ordinary-ish citizens, usually working class men who had been on merchant ships or navy, and had gotten fed up with the really brutal working conditions, quite often really poor pay, tyrannical captains, and you know, quite a high chance of death. so they kind of took a punt and went off and formed their own crews. And the story of pirates gets interesting, and Sam goes through it in the book and talks about how pirates pioneered all these new ways of working together and had really like real diversity. You saw women on board on pirate ships, and you had, you know, them freeing slaves. They gave everyone an equal say on all the decision making, which was kind of incredibly radical at the time. They shared the power out, not just between the crew, but the leadership was shared between the captain and the quartermaster. So you had this sense of not being able to abuse the power like they'd seen in the Navy. And of course, equal pay, because that was one of the few things that would really cause conflict among the crew. So they ensured that everyone got roughly the same, and the captain would only get like a tiny portion more. They even protected people when they got injured. So you had a first form of workplace compensation, which again was like so radical in that, you know, the United States doesn't really quite have that even today. They were really collaborative. They cooperated with between different pirate crews. So it wasn't this, you know, they didn't fight each other when they came across each other. They would actually team up to fight bigger battles. They were awesome at, you know, doing the PR around piracy. So they used the Jolly Roger as this way of getting into battle less, so that they could, you know, kind of just force people into surrender before they even had to step foot on board a ship. Which really increased their revenue. It was very, very strategic. And pirate ships even had same-sex marriage. So they had all these like incredible pioneering radical ways of working. And that's really what Sam's book showed, and what was really inspiring to the crew, that they were these innovators rather than sort of troublemakers that we think. But I guess when I you know, came across the book and I was sort of reading it all through, I still had this problem with the 5R framework that runs through the book. The rebel, rewrite the rules, reorganize yourself, redistribute power, and retell the story. Because again, I felt like it was a bit of a marketing trope. I was like, you know, what does this really mean in reality? Like, it sounds like really nice and alliterative. So I kind of, took him to task a bit on that. And I think the first thing that was really significant, learning about what this means from the community, was the idea of rebellion and rule breaking, because it's hard, you know. I felt like in my previous life and work, I'd never have rebelled because there was these kind of invisible normalizing forces that really, you know, drill sort of fear into you. And I realized, a bit like what we spoke about earlier, that before you can really launch a rebellion in the outside world, what people were sort of telling me was that first you have to be able to rebel against yourself. The kind of this idea of an inner rebellion, to stand up to the status quo. First, you have to stand up to yourself and recognize where you're not giving yourself permission, whether it's to do, to say, to be. Like, I think Tej will speak to this quite well later. That was something I heard from him. So that was, really, really significant. And one of the most important ways that people were able to start to figure out what their sense of self was in order to rebel was to write a pirate code. Really take that original idea of pirate codes that the pirates did and make it sort of modern. And this one on the left is from Tradecraft, who are a story in the book, incredible story of a team that were almost on the brink of collapse, but managed to kind of work their way back up to a new radical mission by going pirate. And this is Dina's.
Can I jump in, because I love this story in the book of Tradecraft. And if you remember, like for me, it was really interesting so Tradecraft was one of those pioneering brands when I was first discovering like conscious consumption, I guess, and where charity meets business, and it was all around, you know, the fair trade movement on coffee and tea and everything. And yeah, what happened? They got stuck because so many other players came in. It was a competition, and then what part did you play in changing or re-energizing their mission?
Yeah, it's a fascinating kind of story, really. They kind of they'd lost their sense of like radical mission. You know, when in the 1980s, Tradecraft was these pioneering pirates who were fighting for whatever fair trade looked like, and over time it became mainstream. It became adopted by the fair trade mark, and so they kind of lost their edge. They subsumed by all these other kind of ethical consumerism, like there's much bigger companies dominating the market, and so they realized their business model just economically wasn't viable anymore. And it just happened that a board member gave the CEO a copy of Be More Pirate at exactly the same time that one of the key team members had been given it by her husband. And so they both were like, we're reading this and we're thinking like, this feels like we could be re-energized. This feels like this is who we should be, but we aren't anymore. So even though they could think of all this stuff that would help them to like technically streamline the business, it was the spirit that they needed, that they'd lost the sense of urgency and purpose that they used to have. So it was all about getting back to that original mission. And what does fair trade mean today, especially in light of climate change and stuff? So yeah, that's in a nutshell, the story of Tradecraft. And they're still on their pirate journey. It's not something, I don't want to lie about what impact is, because I've heard people kind of go, oh, and it was all solved by Being More Pirate. It's a journey, it's an ongoing thing, but they've definitely made some bold moves since then.
Fantastic.
Yeah. So then on the code on the other side is Dina's code. So we'll talk to her later, but so I'll throw that in. And that was really, really significant. And it's significant because once you have a code, it's kind of like your anchor to like just define your purpose and the way that you're going to work together. Which is. And
what's the difference between a set of values which we call out as bullshit often, and a pirate code?
Yeah, I know, because I've written so many value statements and gone, yeah, we're not going to do anything about this. Because you've got to put it into practice. Like a code actually doesn't have to be written down. The pirates didn't write them down necessarily, because if you were caught with a pirate code on you, you could get hanged. So it was more like a living agreement between people. So if you and I have an agreement that says like we have each other's back, and you start behaving badly, I can be like, mate, you're not adhering to the code. So it's a lived thing, really. And I think it just helps to kind of write it out, because for writing is like a good way to sometimes really nail down your thoughts, but it's not necessary. It's not supposed to be a vanity project for consumption by other people. It's supposed to be an identity project for you, so that you look at it and you go, that I feel motivated to do my work now that I know who I am, and also how I'm going to work with other people. So yeah, that's it. Very, very briefly, a code. So I'm going to rattle through this, and feel free to stop me, Ben, if we run out of time. But just going to hit on some of the other points in the book. this is the chapter that Tej is in, is about this idea of going off the edges of the map, that once you've got your code, like, you're supposed to go venturing into the darkness at the edges. That's what the pirates are there for. And, you know, that's hard, but it's sort of necessary. And I think there's one story at the beginning that that covers actually all the points of being pirate, which comes from the Child Rights International Network, which is a human rights NGO. They ended up with the code, but they really started with trying to go off the edges of the map by asking some difficult questions, like putting on the table, like, big question: should we as an organization exist anymore? Because I think she said, I think we're just chasing the funding. And I'd seen that a lot in the charity sector. Like, you're just kind of funding yourself into existence rather than actually changing anything. So she kind of put that out to her team and was like, okay, who are we then? Should we fight for our organization? And from then on, they built their code. But it wouldn't have happened if they didn't. And then as a result, they kind of really veered towards the edges and started to work on some quite controversial campaigns for children. But as a result, their donors and their funders actually like them more, and have been more supportive. So this idea of, like, it's a massive risk for your donors if you start being more controversial wasn't true in this case. Kind of proved, the pirate way. But I think I was going to pause here because we were going to do a little poll, I think, or just put it out there. We always ask this to people now because you think it's such an important thing to do, to get good at asking uncomfortable questions. It's such a first step hack into piracy. That if anyone has uncomfortable questions and wants to kind of submit them, I'm always interested to see what people come up with, albeit they've got to be kind of constructive. So, you know, not just throwing out anything that could throw people off. You're trying to find something that needs to be said but isn't being said. Yeah. So
what might be, can we think, like, just to guide people on this, Alex, like, give me examples of ones that have come up in the past?
Yeah, so you know, things like lots of things around, like, transparency of pay come up. And I think there's one that was interesting recently. I was talking to a group of teachers talking about how they never speak about, like, legacy of when people leave, because it's just a sort of awkward thing that, like, to raise the fact that you might want to leave the company or the school, and so it just never gets told, which means they don't adequately prepare for succession, and it really actually messes things up. And it would, if people were more comfortable, you know, acknowledging that fact, I would actually help everybody's workload. So sort of things like that, you know, especially when I think, being British, we're a little bit polite sometimes.
Yeah, but that's exactly the thought I had. I was chatting with a Finnish lady today in Miami. So she's from potentially one of the most introverted conservative societies in the world, although the one that just came Finland, the top of the well-being index for the 4th year running. But she spent 15 years in America, and she said, like, my true self is American. Like, I'm this outgoing Miami entrepreneurial, vulnerable self, likes asking uncomfortable questions and exploring all these things, but my Finnish culture wouldn't allow me to do that for 20 years. But I love this country. So, and I guess the UK may be somewhere in between the two, depending which way what your family's like. But how much of this being able to confront discomfort is a cultural thing, and do we just need to channel more Brené Brown, or is it something that can be learned?
Of course, everything can be learned. This is the really important thing. You wouldn't, you know, everything we do is largely been a result of practice. So it's just something that I don't think is really is not part of workplace training or culture. And I could go into more detail on this point, because there is, like, evidence and research to show that, you know, having a challenge culture, or where people feel comfortable questioning, particularly people who are above them, results in much better outcomes, especially in risky environments where it's absolutely key that you're certain. So the need for people to go, can you check that another time? Can you, you know, are you sure that's right? Especially when you're trying to do things quickly. And so, it's annoying because there's evidence, there's research, and yet the kind of, like, you know, the comfortability of conformity does sort of take over. But if you particularly as a leader can lead by example, and be okay with a bit of challenge and encourage people, and also very much, this is a really key thing, because we also don't get taught oral articulation skills very much. But if, you know, finding the words in the moment to say the question in the right way that doesn't maybe get people's backs up, but is inquisitive and curious as well as being challenging. Like practicing the ways that you're going to say it, I think actually strangely is a skill that could be, taught. I mean, not taught, but practiced and brought in more often.
And often, from my experience, it's the people who aren't, like me, out front, comfortable talking, who once they're encouraged to come forward and talk, they often are the most articulate with the difficult questions or explaining some real truths that may exist. So it's the talent and the skill is often there, but it's just shining the light in the right direction. So let's come back to this question a bit later on, but let's carry on with a few more points from the book, Alex.
Yeah,
and then we'll get Tej and Dina to come and join us.
Cool. Yeah, so that was that's what we started doing, and we started throwing up, to people like, actually think of rule breaking differently. Start thinking of it as a responsibility to challenge and break the rules and not ask for permission, rather than it being such a risk. That's the wrong way to look at it. But also, asking people to break rules. There was one other challenge that came up again and again and again, which was that people tend to be too complicated with their rule breaking, and that piracy is very much about simplicity and doing less with more, because that's where they were. So we were always trying to get people to not overcomplicate in all kinds of ways. So rather than asking people what rules to break, I ended up starting to ask people like, what small bold actions could you take? And there were so many good examples from the community coming forward about where they'd really felt pirate that fit into this idea of doing something that's logistically easy, but is also on the edge of your comfort zone. This is a lovely guy called Matthew Cook, who I adore. He is an HR manager at a marketing agency and had been doing some research into loneliness. And he decided, he's like, instead of just talking about it at work, he was going to actually go onto the tube and make eye contact with people and try and, hold up these signs. And he said it was absolutely terrifying, but it's been some of the most rewarding connections he's made in his entire life as a result of doing it. And sometimes you just got to try something and kind of go out there, and it's like opened up new avenues. But everyone has like different parameters for what feels okay to do. So I can never say like, this is the bold action. Like, you have to decide. It's on your judgment. Another crew within a big city council decided to create some new rules around email, because email culture, as we all know, is a bit tyrannous at times, and we don't want to be slaves to it, especially as pirates. So they created these 4 bullet points that go at the end of their email signatures, so that every time they send an email, everybody can see like, this is how we treat email, and it's going to be different. Which might not feel bold to many people, but for them, within a quite a conservative kind of culture, was a way of like putting their pirate up in front and raising their Jolly Roger. And the most important thing about this is they did it as a crew. Like, the crew element of piracy is as important as the rebellion aspect. It's about building the relationships, building trust between people, and having your code, because this rule break actually came from a point in their code, which was to bring the soul back into work. So they kind of met out of hours and like had a coffee, and then started to like think about what they could do. So it was this kind of idea that is in one of the chapters of the book, that it's really small groups that change the world, and that the relationships that we build has got to be the bedrock of it all. And I've seen like lots of different ways it's happened. Crew building has happened through the community. The video trailer that you saw earlier was made by Picaroons, which is so I just shout out to them, because it was really great and they did it really quickly. Which is a content marketing crew built on pirate principles. But so they have a kind of set of principles they adhere to, but they're not bound by usual work rules around. They're not really employees, but they have a kind of an umbrella with which they kind of all sit under. So it's slightly just changing up some of the rules of how to work together. And another one is another marketing type agency, Chuffed, who do this, but they've kind of added a layer where everybody who is under the Chuffed freelancer banner also gets a share in the business. So even if you don't work that year on a brief, you still get some like payout. So you've kind of got that unity and like buy-in, but without like stifling people's creativity with like a certain set of hours, or they can try to charge what they want based on their rates and things. So just seeing different models come up. And my favorite kind of crew building example, well, apart from Dina, she's going to talk about that. One of my favorite crew building examples is the Artistic Mutiny, which is a unbelievable explosion of independent artists who all decided that they were fed up of lack of fairness in the arts sector, where all the big organizations get all the money and the grants, but independents make up 45% of the sector. And they figured they'd be better off in a crew, strength in numbers. So what started as 5 people has now grown to over 1,000 within a few months. And it's run by Sarah Sheed, who's an amazing pirate, and she's now got recruited a quartermaster. They're actually getting funding to do this now because people are seeing the power in this coalition of people who all kind of share the same values. So that's probably some of the main points. I'm going to stop now because
no, there's so much, isn't there? It's brilliant. I'll look at these lovely gents.
Have fun.
I've just got now, in answer to your uncomfortable questions question, there are a bunch have come up. I hadn't found the right spot for them, but I'm just going to share a couple of them. Sure. I'm assuming these aren't questions for us, otherwise we're going to have a difficult few minutes. What 3 tasks could we stop tomorrow that would move our work forward? That's a great one. What can we? The less is more approach to everything. Yeah. How much should we pay each other? What do you see is happening in this team that could be a problem in the future? So anticipating stuff. Why would anyone listen to me? That's an interesting question to play out. What conversation do you want to have with yourself while laying on your deathbed? The classic sort of trying to look back. We used to do this thing at Escape the City called Postcard from the Future, where you would write to yourself saying, "Hey, Alex." Things as if things had gone well off the back of launching your career change or startup, and you write about all these great things. It was a visual visioning, and then we post it to them 6 months later.
Yeah,
and often it was at the point where there would be a dip, 6 months after the kind of launch, and people would say, we'd get all this feedback saying that postcard really helped me get back on the journey and the mission. So those exercises, all those writing journaling exercises do work. Are the medical students I teach actually getting value for money from their degree? There you go. That is a difficult question, and it's a big bet, isn't it?
Yeah, we know them. We know the questions in the back of our mind.
How much of your job do you think is useless, pointless, and has no value? It's a bit rude to ask that right now. No, it's what happens if your female employee have 2 consecutive pregnancies? Asking my line manager for clarity on his role, priorities of work. So a lot of these are around workplace culture, right? And is that a reflection of what you see in your work? Is it a lot of about the foundation of how we operate as a group of people, or is it more around, or is it as much around how are we going it? Because I know in terms of education, you talk about the difference between what we learn and how we learn it. Is that the core to it?
Yeah, I think that you do see a lot. It has mainly been workplace culture, but I think it's because it's so ripe for so much disruption. We've just been following. I think that's just such an obvious place to go, and it takes up so much of people's time these days. You know how many hours we all work? It's madness. I think it's the first place that people go. Partly probably because people don't have the time anymore to be joining other causes and sort of have activism on the side. So this is where Sam and I got so interested in this idea of professional rule breaking, and can workplace be the new space for real rebellion? And I feel like it's the potential of power that you would have if you're in a relatively strong position in your workplace and just need to get over that kind of sense of fear that you have that you're going to lose your job, which you probably aren't, and think about a strategic way to really start to challenge. This is a lever that needs to be pulled 100%.
And it's the tactics to do it, which is what you help people with.